For years my parents chose my sick brother over me. I thought he couldn't help it, until the day he told me the truth that blew my entire childhood wide open. You ever spend your whole life trying to prove to the people who were supposed to love you that you were worth the effort, only to realize they were never even looking in your direction? That's what it felt like growing up in my family. Every win I fought for, every milestone I reached, was nothing more than background noise to them. All they ever cared about was my little brother's next made-up medical emergency. But nothing could have prepared me for the truth he finally confessed. The truth that blew the whole thing wide open. From the outside looking in, we were the picture of middle-class stability. A 4-bedroom house on a quiet street, birthday balloons in the front yard, weekend trips to Wisconsin Dells, and backyard barbecues where neighbors waved like we were the Cleavers. But let me tell you something. It's easy to fake a smile when you're the kid no one's watching. I'm Jason, 30 now, and this is about my brother Neil, our parents, and a wedding that turned into a line in the sand I didn't know I needed to draw until it was too late to undraw it. Things shifted hard when I was about 10. Neil had just turned 7 when he got diagnosed with asthma. I remember it clearly. He'd been playing soccer and suddenly dropped to the ground, clutching his chest like he'd been shot. Turned out it was a mild asthma attack. At least that's what the doctor said. But to my parents, it might as well have been a terminal illness. From that day forward, Neil didn't just become the priority. He became the sun around which our entire household revolved. The first real hit I took was at my 6th grade basketball championship game. I'd practiced every single morning for weeks. My coach told me I was getting the starting position. That day, my dad promised he'd be in the bleachers, front row, camera in hand. I still remember glancing toward the entrance every few minutes during warm-ups, hoping I'd see him come through. He never did. My mom never showed either. Neil had a flare-up, they said. I later found out from my cousin that he was perfectly fine at home, playing Legend of Zelda on his GameCube. My cousin had called to wish him well, and heard the video game music blaring in the background. I won that game, hit the final free throw that took us to the championship. But no one in my family saw it. You want to know how many times that happened? Try every important moment in my life. First, I chalked it up to bad timing. Life happens. But after missing my science fair, my 16th birthday party, and eventually even my high school graduation, it stopped being a coincidence and started looking like a pattern. And man, let me tell you, when I say they missed my graduation, I don't mean they showed up late. I mean they didn't come at all. Valedictorian. Me. I gave the speech to an auditorium packed with families cheering for their kids. My parents? At home with Neil because he had exam anxiety. The kicker? His finals weren't until the following week. I found out later from a classmate who followed Neil on social media that he'd been live streaming a video game tournament during my ceremony. And my parents sat right beside him, probably bringing him snacks and cheering him on while their firstborn gave a speech they never heard. By the time I got to college, I already knew not to expect help from them. They'd set aside a college fund for Neil, said it was for future medical expenses just in case. Me? I waited tables on the weekend and worked as a lab assistant during the week. I slept maybe 3 hours a night if I was lucky. But I did it. Graduated with a 4.0 in engineering. Not that anyone back home seemed to care. I got through grad school the same way. Alone. My folks promised they'd come to my graduation ceremony this time. I booked a nice restaurant after. Reserved them front row seats. Morning of, I got a text from my mom. Neil had a migraine. They couldn't make it. That night, Neil posted a story from a rooftop party. Beer in hand, sunglasses on with the caption, "Nothing like a Friday night with the crew." The rage I felt, I can't even describe it. And still, I told myself, maybe they just didn't realize how much it hurt. Maybe they didn't know what they were doing. Maybe if I got married, finally, they'd show up. But when I got engaged to Emily, God bless her, who comes from a family that claps when someone gets a new haircut, I knew I couldn't go through the biggest day of my life wondering if my brother was going to fake another health crisis to steal the spotlight. I knew what my gut was telling me, and my gut was right, because what I found out later after the wedding changed everything. My brother wasn't sick. He never was. If I told you how many nights I sat there staring at the wedding guest list, trying to convince myself I should give them one more chance, you might call me soft. Maybe I was. Maybe deep down, I still had this naive hope that they'd finally show up for me the way they'd always dropped everything for Neil. But I wasn't planning just a party. I was planning a boundary whether I realized it or not. Emily saw it before I did. She's sharp like that. We were sitting on the couch one night, flipping through floral options when I caught myself hesitating over whether to send my parents an invite. She reached over, paused my hand, and just said, "You're allowed to have a wedding without people who've never celebrated you." She didn't have to raise her voice or make it sound like an ultimatum. That one sentence hit me like a truck. I pictured my mom getting a text from Neil right before our first dance, rushing out to bring him tissues or ibuprofen. I imagined my dad pacing in the back row, whispering on the phone while I said my vows. And I thought, do I really want to start this new chapter of my life with the same people who always flipped the page back to Neil? So I didn't invite them. Not my mom. Not my dad. And definitely not Neil. The wedding was intimate, around 80 guests. Mostly Emily's side and our friends from college and work. Her family stepped in like they'd known me for years. Her dad gave a toast that had half the room in tears. Her mom fixed my tie before the ceremony. Her brothers carried the chairs when the wind knocked them over. It was everything I didn't know I needed. Emily's sisters were her bridesmaids, and they pulled me aside that morning just to say how lucky they were to have me as part of their family. My best man, Kyle, joked that I was the only guy he knew who showed up to his own wedding more emotionally supported by his in-laws than his own blood. It was supposed to be funny, but I laughed a little too hard. And let me tell you, standing at that altar, holding Emily's hands, saying those vows with no empty seats in the front row, no last-minute distractions or medical melodramas, it felt like a wound I'd lived with since childhood finally stopped bleeding. For one day, it was just us. No Neil, no drama, no wondering if my success would be sacrificed to his next panic attack or sore throat. It was the first time in my life where all the focus wasn't pulled away, and I swear to you, it was surreal. Of course, the peace didn't last. Someone posted a photo from the reception, Emily and I dancing, cake smeared on my cheek, her laughing like it was the best night of her life. It didn't take long for the group texts and voicemail storms to roll in. My mom called me everything short of a traitor. Said I was punishing them for being good parents to a sick child. My dad accused me of humiliating the family. Neil didn't say much. Just posted a picture of himself in a hospital gown with the caption, "Can't believe I wasn't wanted." Classic. But that's when things started unraveling. Because someone else in our family saw that photo and decided enough was enough. My cousin Kay. She'd always been observant, the quiet one who never stirred the pot. But she called me the day after the wedding. Said she had something I needed to hear. We met for coffee the following afternoon, and I could tell from the look in her eyes she wasn't just there to talk about how pretty the venue looked. Kay told me that Neil had once admitted to faking symptoms. Not just once, but over and over. Said he figured out young that the only time he got our parents' undivided attention was when he was sick or hurt. And when I had something important coming up, that's when the game really kicked in. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe right. It felt like all the ignored birthdays, the missed games, the lonely graduations were suddenly rebranded not as unfortunate coincidences, but as the calculated result of a jealous little brother who played his hand well because our parents were always willing to bet everything on him. And Kay wasn't done. She showed me the texts. Messages from my own mother a week before the wedding, plotting with Neil about causing a distraction during the ceremony if they got invited. "We'll need to be ready in case he needs support," one message read. "Jason won't understand now, but someday he will. Neil can't be left out like that." I read it 3 times before I realized my hand was shaking. They had planned to hijack my wedding day before even knowing they weren't on the guest list. Everything I'd feared wasn't just paranoia. It was real. Worse, it was orchestrated. And in that coffee shop, something inside me, something fragile and patient, finally snapped. There's this moment that happens after you find out the truth, not just any truth, but the kind that changes the way you look at your entire childhood. It's like a photograph you've been staring at your whole life suddenly shifts in your hands, and all the smiling faces start looking like strangers. That's where I was after that coffee with Kay. I sat in my car for almost an hour afterward, engine running, just staring out the windshield while Chicago traffic rolled by in the reflection. Everything I thought I had put behind me. Maybe I'm just overreacting. Every excuse I ever made for my parents evaporated. Turns out, I hadn't been paranoid all those years. I'd been targeted. And the worst part? It wasn't just Neil. My own mother had been a willing co-conspirator. She knew what she was doing. She wasn't just enabling it, she was coordinating it, helping him prepare his little performances so they could steal center stage every time I had a chance to shine. I spent the next few days in a fog. Jamie, my wife, kept asking what was wrong, and I just kept saying I needed time to think. It wasn't that I didn't trust her with the truth. I just didn't know how to explain to someone who grew up in a family where love wasn't conditional, that mine came with strings so tangled I couldn't see where I ended and they began. But Kay wasn't done dropping bombshells. She called me again 2 days later, said she remembered something else. We met up again, and this time she brought more than memories. She brought receipts. Screenshots of texts from my mother, sent to a few family members before the wedding. The messages weren't just gossipy, they were loaded with venom. She wrote things like, "We're going to let Jason have his moment, but if Neil has an episode during the ceremony, we'll need to excuse ourselves discreetly." And then, "It's unfortunate Jason is still competing with his brother's condition, but I suppose weddings bring out selfishness." Selfishness. That word echoed in my head for days. I remembered being 16, suited up for homecoming. I'd saved 3 months of part-time job money to buy the dress clothes I wanted. My mom had even said she was proud, for once. But 30 minutes before I was supposed to leave, Neil doubled over on the living room floor claiming his stomach hurt so bad he couldn't breathe. My parents rushed him to the ER and told me to wait in case they got back in time. They didn't. I stood by the door in a tie and jacket until the corsage in my hand wilted. My date ended up going alone. I never made it to homecoming, and that expensive suit stayed hanging in my closet, unworn and unwanted. The diagnosis? Gas. Literal gas. That's what stole one of the only big nights I had as a teenager. My parents never apologized. Neil never mentioned it again. And me? I buried it. Until now. When I told Jamie everything, she listened quietly. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You didn't grow up with a family. You grew up in a performance where you weren't allowed to be the lead." That hit hard. Because she was right. Jamie's mother, a pediatric nurse with 30 years in respiratory care, offered to help. She reached out to my mom, gently suggesting that Neil's lifestyle, hiking, playing sports, running a 10K, didn't match up with the fragile narrative they'd always painted. My mom hung up mid-call and then accused Jamie's sister of sending spies into our family business. It was surreal, like watching actors refuse to break character even after the curtain had fallen. At some point, I stopped wondering whether I'd done the right thing by excluding them from the wedding. I started wondering why I hadn't done it sooner. But this story didn't end with angry texts or old family wounds being reopened. No, the real twist came about a month later when I got an email from Neil himself. For the first time in years, he wasn't pretending. He wasn't playing sick. He wasn't acting like a victim. He was apologizing. A full-page confession. A lifetime of guilt poured into a single message. And what he said next, I wasn't ready for it. Because apparently, the lies went deeper than even I had guessed. I opened Neil's email expecting more of the same. Maybe a guilt trip, a half-hearted excuse, or some desperate grab for sympathy. What I didn't expect was a full-blown admission of guilt. Line by line, sentence by sentence, he laid it all bare. He said he was sorry, not just for the wedding but for everything. He started by saying he'd been in therapy. At first, it was for what he called anxiety and unresolved emotional stuff. But as the sessions went deeper, his therapist started connecting the dots. Neil wrote that the therapist had asked him one day, "When do you first remember your parents paying special attention to you?" And just like that, the memory came flooding back, the asthma attack at that soccer game when he was 7. He said it was like lightning struck him. That was the moment everything changed. According to him, that was the first time he saw our mom cry in front of him. The first time our dad left work early to come to the hospital. He remembered sitting in a hospital bed with cartoons playing while our parents hovered over him, feeding him Jell-O and whispering about how fragile he was. That's when it started. From then on, if he wanted their attention, all he had to do was cough a little harder, breathe a little faster, hold his stomach and wince just enough to trigger panic. And boy, did it work. What began as occasional exaggerations turned into full-blown performances. He faked everything: flare-ups, panic attacks, stomach pain, migraines, insomnia. He timed them carefully, always on days when I had something big coming up. Birthdays, graduations, competitions, recitals, even college interviews. "I knew," he wrote. "If you were in the spotlight, I had to find a way to turn the lights off." I remember just staring at the screen, hand clenching the edge of the desk, my throat closing tighter with every paragraph. Neil didn't blame our parents, not directly, but he made it clear that they had set the stage. He said he noticed early on that they never celebrated my wins with the same excitement. That even when I brought home straight A's, they barely glanced up unless he was in the room. Then they'd fuss over how he was coping with school stress. He confessed that by high school, the lies had become second nature. At that point, he didn't even need a reason. If I had a big moment, he'd just fall back into the routine. The stomach ache before homecoming? Completely made up. The panic attack during my graduation week? Fabricated. Even the migraine on the morning of my master's ceremony, the one that kept our parents from attending, was a calculated move. He said he wasn't even home. He was at a friend's apartment drinking and playing poker. "I knew if I texted Mom saying I didn't feel good," he wrote, "she'd stay with me." And she did. She always did. But what truly broke me, what made me push the laptop away and just sit in silence, was when he admitted that he'd wanted to stop. He said, "Every time I did it, I felt worse. But the guilt didn't stop me, it made me do it more." I kept thinking, well, I've already ruined so much. What's one more day? He admitted that when Kay showed him the messages from Mom about planning a disruption at the wedding, my wedding, he almost threw up. That's when it hit him. It wasn't just his game anymore. It had become hers, too. He'd created the monster, and our mother had nurtured it like it was her own. Neil wrote that he wanted a real relationship with me, one that wasn't filtered through Mom's drama or built on lies and guilt. He told me he understood if I never wanted to speak to him again, but he was trying to change. Said he was finally looking for a full-time job, planning to move into a place he could afford without Mom's help. He even said he was ready to lose everything, the apartment, the car, the financial support, just to get out from under her thumb. I didn't know what to say. After all these years, how do you respond to someone who stole every milestone from you and now wants to make amends? Who admits they twisted the truth, rewrote the family script, and made you believe you were the selfish one? Jamie read the email and told me, "He's trying. That doesn't erase the past, but it says something." She suggested we meet in person on neutral ground, somewhere public, where I wouldn't feel cornered or emotionally hijacked. I agreed, because a part of me, buried under all the anger and exhaustion, wanted to believe he meant it. But just as we started planning that meeting, my parents found out about Neil's email. And what they did next. It proved that Neil may have been broken, but our parents were the ones holding the hammer. If Neil's confession cracked the foundation of everything I thought I knew, my parents' reaction to it brought the whole damn house down. See, when you've spent years believing the problem was one child's attention-seeking, it's easy to overlook who kept feeding him the script. But when the curtain finally dropped and Neil tried to walk off stage, that's when I saw who the real directors were. It happened fast. Too fast. Jamie and I were just sitting down to dinner when my phone lit up with a string of missed calls. First my mom, then my dad, then both of them in a joint group text that we hadn't used since the last forced Christmas gathering. I knew something was off, but I didn't expect the rage. The kind of rage that doesn't come from hurt or confusion, but from control being lost. Apparently, Neil left his email open on his laptop while visiting home. My mother, ever the snoop, saw what he sent me. And that was it. The whole truth. Years of lies, manipulation, and misplaced loyalty. Laid out in front of her with no room left to twist it into something innocent. And what did they do? They didn't call to apologize. They didn't call to ask questions. They called to accuse. My dad's voicemail, which I listened to twice just to make sure I wasn't mishearing it, said, "I hope you're happy. Your brother is a mess now because of you. You've torn this family apart over old grudges. A real son would have protected his brother, not driven a wedge between us." That's when it hit me. After all that truth, after all that time, they still didn't see me. Not really. They weren't mad that Neil had lied. They were mad that he stopped lying. They were mad the show was over. Then came my mom. She didn't bother with voicemail. She texted, "What you've done is unforgivable. Your brother is under enormous stress now. He's talking about moving out and he can barely breathe from the anxiety. We had to take him to urgent care yesterday. I hope your little email chain was worth it." But guess what? Neil wasn't at urgent care. He was at a baseball game. Kay called me that night. She'd seen him there, laughing in the stands with a drink in one hand and a foam finger in the other. She sent me a picture. Same day, same time. There was Neil, perfectly fine, perfectly healthy, and completely unaware that my parents were using him as a pawn again. That's when I realized the sickness wasn't just in Neil's lies, it was in the way our parents nurtured them. They didn't protect a sick child. They built a system around his imaginary needs because it gave them something to cling to, something to control. They needed him to stay broken. And they needed me to stay quiet. So I didn't stay quiet. I showed Jamie's mom, the nurse, everything. The messages, the hospital stories, the inconsistencies. She didn't hesitate. She got on the phone with my mother, calmly, professionally, trying to offer a way forward. A peace bridge. It lasted 3 minutes. My mom hung up the moment she heard, from a medical perspective, Neil's condition doesn't match his activities. After that, she called Jamie's sister to complain. Said our family was sending outsiders to stir up drama. As if they hadn't spent my whole life treating me like an afterthought in my own home. That night, something in me clicked. I remembered my 17th birthday, the night I stood in a suit by the front door while my parents rushed Neil to the ER for abdominal pain. I waited 4 hours checking my phone, wondering if I should take the bus to homecoming alone or wait. I waited. I missed everything. Later, I found the hospital bag half full in the hallway and the receipt from the vending machine on the dashboard of the car. You know what Neil had? Gas. That memory didn't haunt me because of what was wrong with Neil, it haunted me because of what was missing from my parents. Accountability. Empathy. Fairness. I talked to my aunt, my mother's sister, the one who used to send me cards and always made a point to ask about school. I told her everything. And to my surprise, she didn't defend them. She said, "Your mom's always made it about Neil. I've seen it for years." She told me about the reunion where I just announced a major promotion and my mom immediately pivoted to Neil getting a part-time job at a grocery store. She said she saw it back then but didn't think it was her place to say anything. But now? She said I was right to walk away. "You deserve a life that's not lived in Neil's shadow," she said. Those words stuck with me. Because for the first time, someone in my family said out loud what I'd spent my whole life trying to prove. And I wasn't done hearing the truth yet. Because Neil had more to say, and his next confession would take everything I thought I knew about our family and flip it completely on its head. I wasn't planning on meeting with Neil again. Not right away, anyway. After the email and everything that followed, I figured we both needed space to let the dust settle. But then I got a text from Kay that said he told me more. You need to hear it. And just like that, I found myself sitting across from her again, this time in a quiet corner of the park where we used to go as kids. The air was crisp, but what she said chilled me more than the wind ever could. Years ago, back when we were all still teenagers, Neil had confessed something to her in a moment of drunken honesty. It was at some distant cousin's birthday party, one of those backyard get-togethers filled with soda, hot dogs, and awkward small talk. Kay said he pulled her aside behind the garage, buzzed and laughing, and said, "Want to know a secret? I fake it. All of it." She thought he meant it as a joke. But he doubled down. He told her he had learned how to twist the game. How easy it was to pull the puppet strings on our parents, especially Mom. He said he used to time his flare-ups to overlap with my big days because he couldn't stand watching me get more attention than him. Kay remembered his words exactly. "All I have to do is wheeze or cry and suddenly I'm the center of everything. It's like magic." She never told me. She was 17, scared of starting a war in the family, afraid no one would believe her. And honestly, I probably wouldn't have. I was still clinging to the idea that maybe Neil was just unlucky. That maybe I was the problem for feeling resentful. That maybe all the pain and disappointment I swallowed over the years was just life being unfair. But it wasn't life. It was them. And Kay wasn't finished. She pulled out her phone and showed me screenshots, texts from my mom sent just days before our wedding. These weren't just casual complaints or passive-aggressive digs. These were plans. Detailed ones. We might need to excuse ourselves if Neil starts to feel unwell. I don't want to cause a scene, but people should remember what matters. He might need to lie down during the reception. I'll see if the venue has a quiet space we can use. Jason doesn't get it. He never has. He thinks this is his day, but family always comes first and Neil will always need us more. It was all there. In black and white. They were going to sabotage my wedding before I even sent the invitations. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. This wasn't just neglect anymore. This wasn't favoritism. This was deliberate. This was manipulation carefully layered over years of poor Neil's stories, layered so thick I could barely see the truth underneath it all. And now? Now I couldn't unsee it. I sent the screenshots to Jamie that night. She didn't reply with words, just a hug when she walked through the door and that look in her eyes that said, "I'm sorry you went through all of that. But I'm here now." That hug said more than any family member ever had. Over the next week, the fallout spread like wildfire. Kay started sharing the texts with other relatives, ones who had accused me of being selfish, bitter, ungrateful. One by one, they started reaching out. My uncle apologized. My cousin Ellie wrote me a letter. Even my grandmother, who rarely spoke out, left a voicemail saying she had no idea how deep it all went. But not my parents. They doubled down. They told anyone who'd listen that I was twisting things, that Kay had taken the texts out of context. That Neil was fragile and I was out for revenge. My dad even left me a voicemail saying, "I hope you're proud of what you've done. You've broken this family in two. You've made Neil's condition worse." A real son would apologize. Apologize? For what? For refusing to let them ruin the only day in my life that was supposed to be about me? Jamie's dad, God bless that man, pulled me aside during a small post-wedding dinner and raised a glass. To Jason, he said, for building a life on his own terms, for becoming the man he is despite everything, and for marrying into a family that actually sees him. I almost cried right there. Because for once, someone stood up not just for me, but with me. Later that week, Neil finally reached out again. This time, he wanted to meet in person. He said he had something to say, something bigger than the email, something that would make all of it finally make sense. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I'd get closure or more chaos. But what he told me next, it was the final nail in the coffin of my childhood. We met at this quiet little coffee shop tucked between a hardware store and an old bookstore, the kind of place where no one knew our names, and that's exactly how I wanted it. I was already there when Neil walked in, looking smaller somehow, like the weight he'd been carrying was finally starting to show on his shoulders. He didn't order anything. Just walked over, sat down, and stared at the table between us like it held the answers he couldn't say out loud. It took him a while to speak. I didn't rush him. Then, in a voice I barely recognized, he said, "You weren't crazy." And just like that, I knew this was going to hurt more than I thought. He told me he started therapy a year ago, not because he wanted to, but because his girlfriend at the time had dumped him, called him manipulative, said he didn't know how to exist without making everything about himself. He went in angry, defensive, but over time his walls started to crack. His therapist, a woman named Carla, didn't let him dance around the truth. She forced him to look at the patterns when the symptoms started, when that attacks always seemed to happen, how they lined up with my milestones like shadows trailing my footsteps. Then came the question that unraveled him. When did being sick become your identity? And that's when the memories hit. Not just the soccer field. Not just the inhaler. But what came after. The way our mom would sit at his bedside, stroking his hair, crying like he'd just survived a war. The way Dad would call in sick to work for him. The way every time he was unwell, the whole house would freeze, waiting to serve him. It made me feel important, he said, barely above a whisper. But it also made me feel trapped. He said it got to the point where even he didn't know when he was pretending anymore. Sometimes he actually convinced himself he was having an episode. It was like his body learned to react to fear of being invisible. Then he looked me in the eye and said the one thing I never thought I'd hear from him: "You didn't deserve any of it." I asked him why he didn't stop when he got older. Why he let it go on through high school, through college, even after I moved out. His answer was brutally honest. Because they only cared when I was broken. If I stopped being sick, I was just some average kid. But when I had an attack, I was everything. And I hated it, but I needed it. He paused, then added, "And I hated how much they ignored you." I knew it. I saw it. And I still did it. The silence between us after that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Then he told me about something I didn't know, something that made me want to throw my coffee across the room. A few months before the wedding, he'd overheard our mom on the phone with one of her friends. She was talking about my engagement, but not in a proud way. More like a warning. She said, "We'll have to keep an eye on Neil. These things can trigger his anxiety. Jason tends to forget how fragile his brother is." And then she said the part that made my stomach turn: "We may need to cause a little distraction if things get out of hand." We'll remind him who really needs us. She was planning it. Before I even sent the invitations. It wasn't a reaction, it was a strategy. Neil said hearing that shattered whatever loyalty he still had left. That's when he stopped faking it. Stopped playing sick. Started seeing himself for what he'd become. I let myself become a weapon they used against you, he said. And I'm sorry. Not just for what I did, but for not stopping it sooner. He also told me they tried to bribe him to take their side after the wedding. Promised to keep paying his rent, his car, even offered to co-sign a loan for a condo if he cut ties with me. If he deleted the email. If he blamed everything on Kay. He didn't take it. Instead, he told them he was done being their excuse. He moved out a week later. Took a job at a small logistics firm. Said it's nothing glamorous, but he wants to earn his life now. On his own terms. Do I expect forgiveness? He asked. No. But I'm trying to become someone who deserves it someday. And you know what? I believed him. That night, I went home, sat down with Jamie and told her everything. I wasn't angry anymore. I was exhausted. But for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't carrying that weight alone. Neil had been part of the problem, sure, but he wasn't the root of it. Our parents were. And in the final part of the story, they'd show exactly how far they'd go to avoid accountability and how I finally stopped letting them write my story. I didn't expect peace. Not after everything. Not from them. But I did think, naively, that maybe the truth would buy me some silence. That once Neil stepped out of their shadow and into the light of accountability, they'd see the damage they'd done and just stop. But that's the thing about people who build their whole identity around being right. They don't stop. They double down. It started with a voicemail from my father. I didn't even listen to the whole thing, just enough to hear him say, Neil's health is spiraling again. You need to stop poisoning him with guilt. As if the truth was toxic. As if honesty was the enemy. My mom followed with a text claiming Neil had collapsed from stress and been hospitalized. She said they hoped I was proud of myself. Funny thing is, Kay had seen him the night before at a local brewery, laughing, healthy, surrounded by friends. They weren't trying to protect him. They were trying to reclaim him. Jamie's mom tried again to bridge the gap. She called my mother and offered to organize a small post-wedding dinner, neutral ground, no pressure, just a chance to talk like adults. My mom refused. Said the only acceptable outcome was for me to apologize and return to the family. Return. Like I was a lost item at a grocery store. Then came the final straw. I got an envelope in the mail, no return address, but I knew the handwriting. Inside was a printed letter, no signature, but I recognized every word. My mother had written it. She accused me of corrupting Neil. Said I had manipulated him into therapy, convinced him he was broken when all he needed was support and understanding. She wrote that I was the one who made him sick, that my need for attention had created the rift in our family, not their mistakes. And then, near the end, the line that still burns in my chest. You've always resented your brother for needing us. That's your sickness, Jason. And now you've infected him, too. That was it. I showed it to Jamie. She didn't say anything at first. Just took my hand, squeezed it, and then said, you don't owe them healing. Not anymore. So I wrote my own letter. Not for them. For me. I didn't send it. I didn't need to. I just needed to put it down. I used to wonder what it would take to make you proud. I thought if I worked hard enough, won enough awards, spoke at enough podiums, you'd see me. But the truth is, you were never looking in my direction. You were too busy watching over someone who didn't need protection, he needed boundaries. And when he finally saw through the story, you called him broken instead of brave. That's not love. That's control. You made me invisible. But I'm done living in the shadows. I won't hate you. I won't even fight you. I'm just done letting you reach into my life and pull strings that don't belong to you anymore. If you ever want a relationship, it starts with truth. Until then, I wish you peace. From a distance. I folded it, tucked it in the drawer, and closed it forever. A month later, Jamie and I moved to Boston for her new research position. I took a role at a biotech firm that actually recognizes the work I do. Neil's looking for apartments in the same city. We meet for coffee now and then, not as broken brothers, but as two men who finally understand what it means to write their own stories. We don't talk much about the past. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, he'll say things like, you know, I used to think the only way to be seen was to be sick. And I'll just nod because I used to think the only way to be loved was to earn it over and over again. But not anymore. Not after everything. For the first time in my life, I'm not trying to be enough for anyone. I am enough. And I didn't get that from my family. I gave that to myself.